Welcome to the Crossroads. I'm Martin Anthony, and again, we're in the studio at beautiful ShawTV in wonderful, lovely Campbell River, and broadcasting to the world. And tonight, you know, it's one thing I love about television and PVRs and stuff like that. We can watch this at any time. So I'll say good morning, evening, good night, right now at the beginning. And welcome to the show. And tonight, we're going to talk about some pottery and things like that. And my guest is Emma Heitzman. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's interesting. We met about a year ago, and I saw this quite interesting pottery that you were working on, and it seemed very unique. And we got talking, and since we live in a small town, we kind of bumped into each other here and there.
Yeah.
And pottery is something that's very fascinating to me because it's something that starts off very malleable, and then becomes something permanent. Tell me about how you got into this.
Well, you talk about pottery being super malleable and then permanent. For me, a lot of what I've realized about the work that I do is really working with that at each stage and how elemental it is. And you talk about earth, fire, water, air. There's a piece of each of those elements in pottery. It starts off as earth and water, and if you don't have both, it doesn't go anywhere. You fire it, you literally fire. And air can make a huge difference in how each piece ends. So there's a whole piece for me about just how physical and elemental the process of making any pottery is, which I find completely fascinating and is one of those things that I've been playing with more within my own work. I've been doing this for about 6 years solidly now. I've been taking classes through North Island College in Courtenay, which has been a wonderful incubation space. They have fantastic teachers, fantastic technicians, and an amazing studio that I don't think there are many places in BC that match the quality that you can actually find in Courtenay, in our lovely little small town. So it's been such an amazing blessing to have that space and to be able to go in there and learn. And I started off not really realizing that this would end up being my career, but within a couple of years, I just found that I was not putting as much time into it as I wanted to be. So yeah, when I left my last job, it was to try and make a go of this full time and to be an artist full time. And I've continued taking classes because there's so much to know. It's such an in-depth process. I say I'm 5-6 years in. Most potters are actually not really mastering what they're doing until about 15 years. Right. And that's full time. Yeah. So I'm a long way in, and I still have quite a long ways to go, and there's rabbit holes everywhere.
Yeah, well, you really surprised me because what you're doing is taking this ancient art, and you've been putting your own, shall I say, trademark on it? Is it a trademark? Is it niche?
It's a niche, is the way I think of it. Yeah. Part of the struggle for any artisan, any potter, any craftsperson at this point in time is how do you make your work stand out? Right. How do you make your work different? How do you put your own vision of the world into the work that you're doing? It's a bit challenging when you've got to compete with China. If you're directly competing with China and making perfect pieces every time as a potter, why would anyone buy your $25, $35, $45 mug, perfect and pristine, when they could go to the dollar store and pick up a mug for $2? Yep. Why would you do that? Yep. There's no purpose to that for me. So part of what I try and do with my work is create experiences, because that's something you cannot buy from China. And I'm also really inspired by being out here on the West Coast. I grew up in Calgary, so I have a different kind of come from place. And since I've been out here, one of the ways that I've kind of acquainted myself with the natural world is by getting into mushrooming. So my family and I have spent a lot of time exploring the forests and just learning how to identify what's there.
Right.
And if you actually take a walk in the woods, in fall and winter particularly, there are so many cool things that if you know what you're looking at, you're like, that is the prettiest thing in the world. And there'll be tiny, tiny little pieces, which, for example, is what these are. These guys are based off of cup fungus, which is called orange peel fungus. Okay. And they are about a couple centimeters tall. And they grow all over the place here. And they grow solitary sometimes and make really perfect, pristine little cups. And they also grow in clusters. So when I make them, I'll make, 10 or 15 of them at a time, and I'll cluster them. And as they're soft, I'll start squishing them together so they create new clusters. And they make these really beautiful organic forms that I can never recreate. Each one of these is completely unique.
Unique to
and they're still based off of that concept of something functional, which I like, because otherwise things just sit on a shelf and gather dust. And trying to bring some of that forest in to home.
To the home.
Yeah.
That's a lovely concept, because I know that with the island, has its own little ecosystem, and with the mushrooms and with clay, which one did you notice first? Which entered your life first?
I think the clay did. I've done a little bit of clay work since I was quite small. I took a few classes as a kid, and I did some in school. So technically the clay came first, far before I realized that there was all this wonderful mushroom goodness going on. And at the same time out here, they kind of arrived at the same sort of time period. They showed up pretty quickly after I got here.
Right. Did you see the shapes form in clay from the mushrooms, or did were you working all of a sudden someone went plop and no one would say, hey, that looks like a mushroom?
This project happened, I think, 3 years in. One of the options for taking courses is you can do an independent study if you feel like you have enough knowledge and you have a teacher that's willing to work with you. And it's really self-directed. So you say, okay, here's my goal for the next 3 months. And you work with the teacher and you tell them how you'd like to be graded. So I've done that, and this actually came out of that project. My goal was to match as many identification features as I could in a functional object for 6 different species of mushroom. Wow. So I think I'm up to about 8 different species that I'm able to make well enough that I'm willing to bring them out in the world. I've tried a bunch of other ones and not had quite as much success.
You got to be careful with mushrooms, don't you?
Well, yeah. And also, again, if I want them to be accurate to a certain degree for identification, I want to follow as many things as possible. Like I say, these ones are scaled up a lot, but this is pretty much exactly how they are otherwise. I've put a lot of time into matching the color, into matching the surface. I actually have 2 different glazes that I use on these. They're related, and matching natural surfaces and natural colors is incredibly difficult.
Well, I was going to say, because I know a little bit about pottery and glazing, and I know that glaze is not that color.
No.
You got this thing, so you mix and you kind of do some tests with very close calculations, or kind of slap it on and hope it works? Or?
I did a lot of testing. I was actually trying to match the color of chanterelles, and the standard beautiful golden chanterelle. That's the first one I thought of. That's the one my original sketches were all about. This actually came out of those tests where I was matching chanterelles. And I ended up not getting chanterelles. I got this beautiful orange out of it and went, okay, I know that there are mushrooms that fit that. Which ones do I get to play with? So sometimes you work backwards in an unexpected way. And I really like these. These are one of the things that I'm really proud about having gotten to. And it was in some ways an accident. Wow. So
that's I love how these accidents create something. And the development of this has now gone in, and I've seen the work from before, and I've seen your work now, and in the studio earlier today, we're in the studio, and I'm glad you came out. We rushed over here because it's nice to when a plan works out. What is the, now okay, so there's some science involved. There's clay, there's weights, there's water mixture and all this stuff. Then there is the creative side, what I'm going to build as a shape. What is is there another side? Is there a spiritual part to it at all? Or is there some other sort of usually there's three things that make something work. So is there a third?
For me, there is definitely a somewhat spiritual side. Again, I talk about how elemental it is. And there's this deep connection that I get to have with what I'm working on. It's meditative. It's meditative to throw. It's mindful. You have to actually think about each of your motions until you get experienced enough, and even then it helps to actually talk yourself through each step and stage. It's all part of it for me. And I also try and bring some of my own spirituality to the work that I do. It's things that I care about. And there's also the element of magic, of kiln magic, which I talk about in relation particularly to a couple of kinds of kiln firings. You may not know, there's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 typical types of firing that you'll find, and they're different styles of firing that give really different results. I brought one thing here that's from a particular magic kiln. This is from one of those kilns at the college, which is our soda firing, high firing kiln. And this section in here is actually raw clay. So there's 2 glazes on this and a little bit of decoration, and the rest of this is actually from adding high fire or sodium into the kiln at a high temperature, which turns it into a gas, which goes wandering around the kiln as a gas form, and it likes silica, and silica is one of the main components in clay. So when it finds the silica in the clay, it spontaneously forms a glass, a sodium silicate matrix, which is basically a glass. And it will stick and combine, and you get really different effects depending on where the sodium touched and where it didn't. And it's one of my favorite firing types because you never quite know what's going to happen. That's the magic right there. You put something in, you just wait and see. You never know. Wood firing is also like that. When you put wood in a kiln and you get it to a high enough temperature, same thing. A lot of the wood compounds that you'll find are actually ingredients we use in glazes. So they go wandering around the kiln as a gas, looking for silica. And when they find silica, they form surface. It's beautiful. And it tells a story every time.
Great.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little short break. We'll be right back. Martin at the Crossroads. I'm with Emma. Okay, well, there's one thing you may not know about me is that I'm a pilot, and I've been a pilot since I was 16, and so you know what? When I see airplanes, I gotta go look at them. Anyways, I have Andres here. Andres, thanks for joining me at the Crossroads.
Hey, no problem at all. I'm glad I could tell you a little bit about our flight school and flying around here in Courtenay.
Well, I'm really looking forward to getting up in one of the ultralights, and I've been flying real, sorry, can I say real airplanes, or what do you?
No, these are real airplanes, just a little bit lighter.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, and I'm sorry if I offended you because, you know, years ago someone says, hey, try hang gliding. I says, it's got to have landing gear. My feet aren't landing gear. Do you have the same philosophy on that?
Well, you know, ultralights have come a long way. We have ultralights nowadays that can go 200 miles an hour, have 1,100 nautical mile range. So with carbon fiber and different technologies nowadays, ultralights, you know, are not the ultralights from 30 years ago. Although you can still fly the lawn chair, and they are still ultralights, but not too many people do that anymore.
Speaking of lawn chairs, I recall that now, actually. It's all coming back to me. You see, I've been away from Canada for 15 years. I was working in Istanbul, Turkey, in media, and now I'm back in Canada. I have my license, and all the paperwork's back in place, but I want to know what's happened in the last 15 years. Do you think you can spend some time with me in the future to talk about that?
Absolutely, man. I'd love to. I'd love to get you back up to current standards and get you flying.
That sounds great. Well, we'll have some stories to share. And Andreas, what's your last name, Andreas?
Rutkowitz.
Okay, Andreas, thank you so much for your time, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.
You too, thanks.
Okay. And we're back at Martin at the Crossroads. Emma's my guest today, this morning. As I said earlier, whenever you're watching this, it's always a wonderful time to watch the show. And with your work, I want to mention the bees. There's one thing that I find very, I want to just lick these things because they're just so yummy.
Well, let me put one in your hand and we'll start there.
Yeah.
This work, boy, what do I want to say about it? This work is work that I've been exploring for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. This is probably the main functional line that I want to do. Mm-hmm. As I become more professional, mm-hmm. One of the things you have to decide is what are you willing to make a lot of?
Yeah.
So this is one of those things I'm willing to make a heck of a lot of, because every time I make bees on a pot, they make me smile. Yeah. And again, I've done a lot of glaze exploration. So one mm-hmm. of the things I ended up discovering is this wonderful yellow, and the interior glaze is actually something I've developed myself as well. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of kind of like, okay, what kind of a color palette can I develop? And from that discussion I had with a couple of other people, it was really obvious that it needed to go in this kind of honey direction. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay. I set a project one year to make 60 different mugs of different designs. I have a whole pile of sketches of things I haven't even got to yet. This was one of those designs. And my first efforts were pretty rudimentary, but they have the elements that I like in it, which includes the kind of, it's based off of the straw honey hive, where they'd have the bottom kind of a conical, they kind of, right. Yeah. So that's where that concept comes from. And one of the things I really like about it as a mug is actually how well each one can fit in the hand. Each one of these is also unique. I do each one differently because everyone's got different hands. And there's no reason I should control that. Everyone just needs to come find their perfect mug.
Find their perfect, the mug that's made for them. Yeah. That's a nice idea.
So I do make mugs, I make bowls, and I make plates, and this one's a pasta bowl here. This one's one of the couple of pasta bowls I've done. But I've done this basically in any kind of a dish that you want. I can just kind of do them however.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Yeah. It's, you know, I'm always like, there's so much involved that people don't understand, especially in a hand process, because with machinery and everything else, it kind of has an idea what to do, and then it kind of spits all these things out of the other end. It goes through the kiln and everything. But to create the little bees on there and to do everything else, it's not just people don't realize the amount of work that goes into it. What's the what is going to be your motivation to repeat these things over and over again? Can you share that with me and share with us? Or is there
like I say, a lot of it's that it makes me smile. Yeah. I like refining what I'm doing. This size that you're holding of mug is actually new this year. There's actually quite a liquid difference. In how much those will hold, and so part of that came out of people asking me to make bigger and bigger pieces, because people like big coffee mugs or big tea mugs. So sometimes it's just adding variation in what I'm doing, but also refining my own skills. A lot of it's a challenge for me. I can do better than this. These are already good. Yeah. I can do better than this.
Well, speaking of bigger and bigger, now today I saw your. Is that as big as it's going to get?
No, I still want to go bigger. So again, part of this for me is that I love to challenge myself. So one of the wonderful things I can do to challenge myself is change sizes and change techniques. I'm also working in kind of sculptural concepts. In the last couple of years, I've done sculpture classes and had the opportunity to look at what I do from a really different lens. What you saw at the college today came out of a project about space, about personal space and containers. I had a year at the college where I was really in demand for people asking me questions, and I'm happy to do that, but there's a thing about being able to contain myself, and every now and then I need to put up a bubble. So I ended up starting to physically make these bubbles, these containers of space. And I've made them out of a few different objects. So I've got some that I made out of a stiff plastic and a row cloth. It's really portable, because this is the other thing I learned, is that when you go really large, it gets really hard to move things anywhere. But
I saw the video.
yeah, that thing took like 8 people to move into the kiln. It was already on wheels. It was a huge process to actually get it where I needed it to be. So again, part of the challenge for me when I go really big is there's really physical challenges that I now have to overcome about how do I move it where it needs to be? How do I fire it? Where is it going to be located in the end? I don't answer all of these questions before I build them. Sometimes I just build them. So that project, that personal space project, is actually called temenos, which is a Greek word that refers to land set aside as sacred space. So a temple would be built on a temenos, but it also is a word that refers to personal sacred space. So the concept that I'm working with there is, again, this is a container for self, a container for if you need a moment to step outside, take a break from the world, go hop into temenos, take a moment, breathe, meditate, whatever you need to do, and then refresh yourself for what's next. That's kind of where that came out of. The end goal for me is that I would like to actually build on-site a larger version that can be left as public art installation. And I'd like to have a kiln that I can build over top of it. This is a thing that is possible. You can build a kiln around your really large piece, fire your piece, take the kiln away, and leave the piece there. So when I talk about large, it's probably I don't know, the current one's about 38 inches tall and 28 inches wide. I'm looking to at least triple that. And it would probably be several of these pieces in conjunction. I
find it interesting that you're working on a piece for private space, but it takes 8 people to lift it into the kiln. So you can't make it on your own. You have to. Is there a lot of teamwork in pottery?
Oh God, sometimes, yeah.
I just thought about that.
It depends on what you're up to. If you're doing really little pieces, you don't have to have interaction with anyone at all. But there are a lot of good reasons to have community when you're doing ceramic work or pottery or even any art. One of the reasons I love going back to the college, and I'm still there, is that there's a huge community of really wonderful people who I can bounce ideas off of and say, hey, what do you think about this combination? Or I was thinking about this, or I've got some pieces to go in this kiln. Do you have anything else to help me fill it up the rest of the way? So there's a lot of ways of sharing space, which are really helpful.
Getting involved in something like this, just as for people who are watching the program, what avenues can you take? I know you can just go out and buy some clay and throw it on the kitchen table and try to do something.
Not recommended. I mean, you can. There are wonderful people who have learned to create everything on their own. There's tons of really good YouTube videos. But if you're in the area, there are some really wonderful teachers. So again, North Island College in Courtenay has classes every semester, which first people who get priority are those in the fine arts program. But if you are not part of the fine arts program, you are also welcome to join. There are plenty of just people who come in to the space and come participate. And that's one option, is to come participate in the college level classes. There's 2 every spring, and there's 1 in the fall semester. There's also a continuing education program that I believe is run out of the Courtenay Rec Center.
Right.
But they also use the studio facilities at North Island College, and that runs for 8 weeks. There's usually some other rec center goodness going on. Campbell River actually has a small pottery program here at our community center downtown. And I know that the Lewis Center in Courtenay also has some.
Excellent.
And there's also a couple of other wonderful teachers, wonderful potters who are willing to open their studio spaces.
So there's private as well.
There are some private ones. You just
Great.
have to know where to look. It's a little tricky sometimes.
Well,
but,
we'll leave some notes at the end of the program here, and you know what? We've run out of time.
Absolutely.
So Emma's been my guest tonight, and we will continue with the Crossroads again on another day. I'm Martin Anthony. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.